Southern Brazil, February 2007. A woman finds her husband dead in their bedroom. She tells police he had been drinking, that he was depressed, that he had locked himself in the room and she'd heard noises, something breaking, then a groan, then silence. When she opened the door, he was hanging. She says she cut the rope to try to save him, but it was too late. The police take her statement. A doctor examines the body. The cause of death is recorded as suicide. The case is closed. The woman collects a widow's pension. She moves on. Her name is Alexandra Dougokenski. 13 years later, it was her son's turn. Planalto is a city in the northwest of Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil's southernmost state. Population 10,000 people, and a meaningful share of those live out in the rural area outside town. The town itself is smaller than the numbers suggest, and almost everything that matters sits around one square. The courthouse, the hospital, the police station, the child welfare office, and a house about 300 meters from all of it, where Alexandra lived with her 2 sons. Anderson was 17, the son of her first marriage to José Dougokenski, whose name she kept. Rafael was 11, the son of her second relationship. Alexandra didn't work. By every source available, she never had. She lived off a widow's pension of around 2,000 reais, which is around $400, split between a payment for her and a payment tied to Anderson, money that existed because José had died in 2007. By all accounts from her neighbors, Alexandra was a visible presence in the neighborhood. She took daily walks around the square. She walked Rafael to school every morning, even though he was 11, even though the school was closed, even though most kids that age walk alone in a town where everyone knew everyone. People noticed this, but they thought it was only sweet. What they didn't know was that Rafael's teacher had already flagged something to the school director, something that wasn't sweet at all. Rafael was really shy. And when I say shy, it's not ordinary childhood shyness. It was something more severe. When he needed to use the bathroom, he wouldn't ask the teacher directly. He would lean over, whisper to a classmate, and have them ask on his behalf. The teacher had seen a lot of children over the years. This wasn't shyness, she thought. She flagged it to the other teachers. She wanted Rafael referred for psychological support. But bureaucracy moves at the speed it moves. The referral never had time to happen. Rafael disappeared first. May 15, 2020. A normal Friday morning. At 9 a.m., Alexandra walked to the child welfare office and reported her 11-year-old missing. She told welfare office Denise Vanny that the last time she had seen Rafael was the night before, around 10:30 p.m. She had gone to check on him, cover him with an extra blanket because the temperature had dropped, and he had asked to stay up a little longer to watch YouTube. She said fine, and she went to sleep. In the morning, the front door was unlocked. She assumed Anderson, her oldest son, had left for work and forgotten to lock it. She made chimarrão, a traditional Brazilian tea, tie-dyed the house, and took a phone call with Delair, her boyfriend. When she passed to Rafael's bedroom, he wasn't there. She assumed he had gone to her mother's house across the street, where her mother kept a chicken that belonged in theory to Rafael's. Then her mother arrived for her usual daily visit and mentioned she hadn't seen Rafael. Within minutes, Anderson woke up. He hadn't left for work. Together, they searched the house and confirmed Rafael was gone. The temperature was below 8 degrees Celsius, which is about 46 Fahrenheit, and Rafael had last been seen wearing a short-sleeved green shirt, dark pants, and rubber flip-flops. He had left his phone behind. From the welfare office, Alexandra went directly across the square to the police station to file a missing persons report with Delegate Ursilio Carletti. He examined Rafael's phone, left behind in the bedroom. Nothing relevant. There is a detail that would matter later, one that prosecutor Michelle Kuffner would point to in interviews. Rafael's phone was a basic low-storage model, and to keep it running well enough to play his games, he routinely deleted his messages and photos. There was basically nothing left on it to examine. Not because anyone had cleared it, but because that simply was the way he kept it. Within a couple of hours, the entire town was looking for Raphael. By midday, volunteers groups were combing the town. Classmates out of school that week because of the pandemic showed up at the welfare center asking how they could help. Alexandra recorded a video for social media. In it, she describes the door left unlocked, her assumption that Raphael was at his grandmother's, the blanket she added the night before, the ordinary bedtime. All we are asking for is a little sign that he's somewhere, that someone saw him. He's 11, but he's our little one. People watched that video and felt something they couldn't quite name. She sounded, several of them said, like she was describing something that had happened to a friend of a friend. By nightfall, with no sign of Raphael, Delegate Carletti, for the first time, considered the possibility of trafficking. Small towns near the interior aren't immune, he reasoned. Nearby cities were close enough. And then there was the matter of his phone again. Everyone in town knew Raphael never put it down. If someone had coached him to leave it behind to avoid being tracked, that was the kind of detail that kept the delegate up at night, in a house with no heating, in a town that had dropped to 5 degrees. The investigation moved fast and wild. Alexandra named her first suspect, her half-brother, Jean, claiming he had a history of mental illness and had inappropriately touched Raphael. There was no police record, no medical record, no corroboration of abuse, and as Alexandra herself noted, Raphael would have opened the door to Jean in the middle of the night without hesitation, which is a really weird thing to say about a man you believe touched inappropriately your son. But let's move on. Jean was investigated and quickly cleared. The investigation was back to nothing. Alexandra had named a second suspect, Raphael's father, who lived in Bento Gonçalves, over 300 kilometers away, roughly 5 hours by car. Their relationship since the 2018 separation had been tense, according to Alexandra. Rodrigo wanted Raphael to live with him, but the boy didn't want to go. Rodrigo drove to Planalto on Saturday. He gave a statement and then told the delegate he needed to head back the same day. Carletti pushed back hard. "Your son is missing. How can you leave?" And Rodrigo stayed. Hours later, Alexandra called police again. Someone had supposedly spotted Rodrigo's car near relatives in Ametista do Sul, 16 kilometers from Planalto. So, in paper, it was close enough, if true, to place him near the scene. Combined with his stranger behavior during the interview, it made him the leading suspect. However, the Federal Highway Police checked. Neither of Rodrigo's true registered vehicles, a car and a motorcycle, had entered Planalto that Friday. Cell tower data and internet access logs placed his phone in Bento Gonçalves area the entire time. He explained his car had been on the shop. He'd come to Planalto by carpool and was anxious to catch his ride home before it left without him. So, basically, the lead evaporated entirely. Meanwhile, the town kept looking. By day 4, what didn't add up was Alexandra. She refused to join the search parties because she didn't want to get dirty. Neighbors who came by to help found her sitting calmly on the porch. Some of them stopped helping. If she wasn't worried, why would they be? On day 5, prosecutor Michelle Kuffner, who was based on another city, drove out personally to interview Alexandra. The house next door belonged to a couple who'd moved from Americana in the São Paulo state. They were away on a trip that week, which meant there were no neighbors to ask whether they'd heard arguing, noise, or anything else. Inside, Alexandra was watching TV in a spotless house. Kuffner asked if she was on medication, something to explain her calmness. Alexandra said no. She answered every question coherently, without hesitation, and at one point even made a joke to Anderson. "We had no connection to this child, and we hadn't slept properly in days, worrying about him. But she slept fine," Kuffner said later. Kuffner also asked whether this kind of disappearance was normal for Raphael. Alexandra's tone shifted. "My children are extremely obedient. Neither of them disobeys me. They don't leave without saying." The next day, with the search at 1 week, Dennis Venny came by again. This time, Alexandra answered the door, already dressed for a television interview. Eyes red, as though she had been crying all night because every sound made her think it was Raphael coming home. She had built a small shrine in the living room, his photo, an item of his clothing, and a stuffed animal. Denise left that visit second-guessing herself. We thought maybe we were wrong. It would be too cold of a thing for a mother to do. Hours later, a luminous swept of Alexandra's house and her mother's house turned up nothing. A neighbor later told police she heard Alexandra mocking the fact that the search of her own house had turned up nothing. On Saturday, Alexandra messaged police. She just noticed, cleaning Raphael's room, that the date he disappeared, May 14, was circled in pen on his calendar. Maybe, she suggested, he'd planned the whole thing. Delegate Carletti had been in that house for the luminous sweep. For interviews multiple times. He had looked at that calendar before, and there were no marks on it. Something clicked into place for him right there. On day 10, Alexandra was called back for another interview. Investigators laid her own statements side by side. The times she'd seen Raphael had shifted from 10:30 to 11. Her account of finding the door open had changed in the retelling. Whether she went to her mother's or her mother came to her had changed. And now there is the calendar mark that hadn't existed days earlier. She handed over her phone for forensic extraction. What the analysis found on it ended any question of whether Alexandra was a grieving mother or not. On the night Raphael disappeared, in the exact hour she claimed to have been asleep, Alexandra was watching 3 porn movies with a rape fantasy theme. The footage showed victims restrained, with fabric bags pulled over their heads, and we'll sadly have to come back to this in a bit. The same session also contained a search for the chemical composition of a date rape drug, and a saved news article with the headline, "Sex workers kill 5 clients using eye drops." When asked about the drug search, Alexandra said she had seen something in a soap opera and gotten curious. She offered no explanation at all for the videos. There was one more file. A photograph of Raphael, only neck to waist, taken while he appeared to be asleep, days before his disappearance. She couldn't explain why she'd taken it either. The delegate ended the session and asked her to return that afternoon. When she came back, he laid it out plainly. The Rodrigo lead was dead. The Jean lead was dead. Inside that house, there had been her, Delahaye, and Anderson. Delahaye had a full night on the hotel security footage. Anderson had been in his room. That left her. At 4:30 p.m. on May 25th, 10 days after the boy disappeared, Alexandra confessed that Raphael had died. Her first version, she had taken diazepam from her mother's house, pills described to her half-brother Jean. Jean again, the man she had already tried to frame once, now providing pills without even knowing it. She said Raphael was agitated, wouldn't put the phone down, wouldn't sleep, so she gave him the pills to help him rest. She claimed she'd check on him later and found him unresponsive, lips dark, hands cold. She panicked and tied a rope around his ankles and neck to make a kind of a harness, and carried him to an empty house next door to the neighbors that were away on a trip, where she placed him inside a washing machine box in the open garage, behind a wooden partition, beside a barbecue grill. The garage was open-sided, visible to anyone. Raphael's body had been sitting 12 meters from his own front door the entire 10 days the town searched for him. When the rope was examined, the ankle's end was loose, no ligature marks at all, despite Alexandra's claim she had tied his feet to carry him. The neck end told a different story. It had been pulled so tight that the circumference of his neck, at the point of pressure, measured the width of a small coffee cup. His face was congested. His tongue was out. Textbook mechanical asphyxiation. The diazepam in his system was real, but it was roughly 0.1 milligram per liter of blood. Not nearly enough to put a child into a deep sleep. Turns out, Alexandra hadn't found her son dead from from an overdose. She had made sure he couldn't fight back. Then she strangled him. And then, what I think is the worst part, when the box where Raphael's body was open, he had his head wrapped in fabric and the rope cinched around his neck. So it was a visual close enough to the restraint scenario in the porn videos that more than one agent at the time noted the resemblance out loud. Draw your conclusions about what was happening in her head. The truth is, we'll never know because she never commented on this specifically. Anderson eventually told police the full story of that night. He'd been awake under his covers, playing on his phone, hiding under blankets to play after Alexandra's bedtime rules. At around 3 a.m., he heard sounds near the kitchen, then the front door. The light on Raphael's room stayed on for about 10 minutes. He stayed on his room. He had learned over the years that the safest response on that house was to make yourself invisible. Alexandra later asked him not to mention any of this to the police. She told him it would only waste investigators' time looking at the family instead of searching outside for Raphael. According to the prosecution case, and confirmed by physical evidence and accepted by the court, Alexandra had grown increasingly intolerant of Raphael's refusal to follow her phone rules. Unlike Anderson, who apologized when caught, Raphael pushed back. He'd point out that his friends were allowed to play past bedtime. He'd ask why the rule even existed. In her own words, recorded in the case file, the reason boiled down to this. She was tired of the boy constantly asking why he had to get off the phone. And, as she put it, he didn't bring her anything, which means he costed money. He didn't add anything to the house. Rodrigo's child support was occasional, so not guaranteed. The pension, the one thing that kept that household running, was tied to Anderson. Raphael, the one who asked questions, simply didn't add anything into that equation. According to messages recovered from Rodrigo's phone, not Raphael, since he deleted everything to save space, the boy had told his father things were very complicated at home, and they had made a plan. When Raphael turned 12, he'd asked to move to Bento Gonçalves. Rodrigo would say yes, but Raphael never turned 12. 9 days into her detention, Alexandra asked for a notebook. Over the following days, she filled 166 pages. The letter is addressed at first to Anderson. It opens with drawings, eyes, hearts with teardrops, faces. Then, "My son, don't leave me. Help me, please. I need you by my side even if I don't deserve it." From page 3, she narrates her own life. Her father beaten to death, breaking up a fight at a small town soccer match, a childhood of poverty and beatings she describes in granular details, leaving home at 14 to marry a 27-year-old farm worker named José. She describes herself, elsewhere in the letter, as a devoted, proud mother who breastfed Anderson even when it hurt. When the letter turns, she starts writing directly to Raphael instead of Anderson, describing a bird that sings at her cell window each morning, which she believes is him. At night, he sits beside her bed and holds her hand, though he never answers her questions. "It's not a dream, because I don't sleep. I feel his affection." Then she begins denying everything. She accuses Rodrigo of arriving at her house with an armed man, of killing Raphael when the boy resisted, of forcing her to hide the body under threat of killing Anderson too. 3 years passed since Raphael's death and Alexandra's trial, mostly pandemic delays in the Brazilian court system. So now we are in 2023. The trial opened on March 23 and collapsed 11 minutes into the first session when the defense attorney walked out, citing a supposed procedural error involving an audio message. The claim, a recording alleged sent by Raphael to his father a day after the date prosecution said he died, which would have unraveled the entire timeline if true. Prosecutors pointed out that the audio had been in the case file for over 2 years. It wasn't a new recording. It was a message Raphael had sent his father months earlier, which Alexandra herself had forwarded to Rodrigo's phone the day after the murder, in an apparent early attempt to point suspicion at him. The defense had, by that point, run through 4 different versions of what had happened to Raphael. This was the 5th. The defense spent its time elsewhere, accusing the prosecutor of violating Alexandra's right to silence. The lead prosecutor for the family side, representing Rodrigo, summarized it to the jury in the terms that needed no embellishment. Alexandra waited for the diazepam to put her son to sleep, then strangled him. Then she dragged him by a rope and kept him in a cardboard box for 10 days like garbage. The jury convicted her on all counts: aggravated murder with multiple qualifying factors, base motive, futile motive, use of a method that ensured the victim couldn't defend himself, concealment of the body, procedural fraud, and falsifying records. Initial sentence: 30 years and 8 months. In August 2023, following an appeal from Kuffner's team, the Rio Grande do Sul Court of Justice recalculated the aggravating and mitigating factors and raised the sentence to 39 years, 1 month and 10 days. Among the additions, a specific aggravating factor for committing crimes against your own child. But we are not done yet, which bring us back to 2007. Do you guys remember José, Alexandra's first husband? He and Alexandra had married when she was 14 and he was 27. A detail she frames in her letter as a romance, which is a weird take, but okay. They had Anderson together in 2003. By 2007, José had lost both his jobs and started drinking heavily. The family had moved to a rural property where he worked as a caretaker. In Alexandra's account, José got drunk, threw a glass in her direction, said she and the boy could leave for all he cared. To avoid the fight, she says she took 4-year-old Anderson to sleep in the guest room, leaving José alone. She describes hearing vomiting, then 10 minutes of what she assumed was him breaking things, then a deeper sound. She waited through it all. When she finally went in, she found him hanging. She cut the rope to try to save him, but it was too late. Forensics found at the time 0.7 grams of alcohol per liter in his blood, roughly 3 shots worth. It was ruled as suicide with a high degree of certainty, but José's families never believed it. His sister Elena said Alexandra was visibly cheerful at the funeral. The family told police at the time that they'd witnessed Alexandra threaten José's life on more than one occasion and that she had a lover, which gave her not just a motive but the possibility of a second pair of hands to help stage a hanging. It went nowhere. After Raphael's death, though, José's family hired an attorney to reopen the case. A criminal profile comparison of the 2 deaths had a 95% match in modus operandi, and there was the knot, not a simple loop, the kind Alexandra used on her own clothesline, identical across 13 years. Forensic expert Edward Lemos reviewed the original 2007 scene photos and autopsy. His 34-page report concluded, not a suicide. The ligature mark on José's neck ran horizontal, uniform in depth, all the way around. And a hanging in a suicide produces a diagonal ascending mark because gravity pulls you down while the rope pulls you up, basically. José's mark meant he had been strangled while lying down or already incapacitated, and then he was moved. The body's position also didn't match where it would have landed if the story was true. However, Alexandra was 19 when José died. Under Brazilian law, crimes committed before the age of 21 carry a 10-year statute of limitations. So by the time anyone connected the 2 deaths, more than 13 years had passed. She would never be tried for what happened to José. Delegate Carletta said that what stayed with him afterwards wasn't the confession, it was the reconstruction. When investigators brought Alexandra back to the house to walk through what happened, she spent most of the visit rearranging things. Picture frames nudged back into place. Raphael's clothes, refolded the way she liked them, sorted by color, by size, and the way she'd always kept them. She became hysterical at one point, genuinely distressed. The only time in the entire process anyone saw her break. But it wasn't at the confession, not at the sight of Raphael's body on a box. She was screaming that the police were destroying her house. Delegate Carletta put it simply. They expected her to be undone by relieving her son's murder. Instead, what undid her was a living room slightly out of order. Later, she told him that if it had been up to her, she'd have cleared everyone out, tie-dyed the house, and only then left them back to reconstruct the crime. One thing that was really, for me, weird here is Alexandra's mother, because throughout the trial, she insisted her daughter would never have done this. And this is the same mother that had thrown Alexandra out at 14 after a beating with a whip. The same mother that knew her own son's prescription pills had gone missing from her house and never thought to ask why. So for me, that's really weird. To this day, Anderson believes his mother is innocent. I believe she's paying for something she didn't do. My mom is an incredible person. She'd never hurt a fly. And I think we can understand this because he has already lost a father he barely remembers and the brother he watched disappear from across a wall at 3 in the morning. So whatever it costs him to keep believing her, it's kind of the only version of his family that he has left. Prosecutor Kuffner said nobody in the family cried for Raphael. Not his grandmother defending her daughter on the stand, not his uncle defending his sister, not Anderson crying for his mother's sentence rather than his brother's death. The closest thing to grief in the courtroom came from a man who wasn't related to him by blood at all, and from a town 300 kilometers from anyone who shared his last name. She was talking about Delaye, Alexandra's boyfriend at the time, who took time off work to try and find him, and that collapsed on the floor once he knew what his then girlfriend did. Raphael Mateusz Winskis was born in 2009. He liked to play games on a phone too cheap to hold much memory. He had already asked his father if he could come live with him, quietly, the way a child asks for something he has learned not to ask for. His father had said yes. He had been counting on turning 12. This is Brazilian Horror Stories, and my name is Nell. See you next time.